The warm summer breeze gently ruffled Emily's hair as she stood at the edge of Sydney Harbor, gazing at the stunning skyline before her. The Sydney Opera House stood proudly, its sails illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun. To the left, the Sydney Harbor Bridge stretched across the water like a great iron arm, holding the city together. The colors of the evening sky shifted from soft pastels to a deep purple as the day slowly turned into night. The lights of the city began to twinkle, reflecting off the calm waters beneath. Emily felt a sense of peace in the moment, but it wasn't the same kind of peace she had once felt. This was different. It was the kind of peace that comes with the quiet acceptance of the past, the kind that allows you to breathe again after the storm has passed. The last few months had been difficult for her. She had come to Sydney hoping to escape the memories of a relationship that had ended in heartache. She had loved deeply, with all her heart, but the love she had given had not been returned in the way she had hoped. Now, standing on the shores of this vibrant city, Emily felt as though she were beginning a new chapter, one that was all her own. Her eyes traced the silhouette of the Opera House once more, its iconic white sails shimmering in the evening light. It was the same view she had seen countless times in pictures, on postcards, even in her dreams, but seeing it in person felt different, more alive, more real, as if the city itself was welcoming her, urging her to start fresh, to make new memories. She had come to Sydney to find something, to rediscover herself. And as the new year approached, she couldn't help but wonder what this year would hold. What would the future bring? What kind of person would she be by the end of it? Taking a deep breath, Emily closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about the past year, the ups and downs, the laughter and the tears. It had been a year of growth, of learning painful lessons, but also of finding strength she never knew she had. Now, standing here, she felt ready to let go of the past, to release the weight that had been holding her down. She opened her eyes and looked out at the city once more. Her gaze drifted to the skyline, where the lights sparkled like 1,000 little stars. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of music and chatter drifting from the nearby harbor. The countdown to the new year had already begun, and the city was buzzing with excitement. Emily smiled softly to herself. The past was behind her, and the future was waiting, full of endless possibilities. She didn't know exactly what it would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. The world was wide open, and she was ready to step into it. As the first firework burst in the distance, lighting up the sky in a shower of colors, Emily made a wish. It wasn't for a specific person or thing. It was a wish for herself, to find happiness again, to find love, and most of all, to find peace within her own heart. The fireworks began to sparkle and explode above the water, their reflections dancing on the surface. Emily stood there for a long time, watching the lights. The city around her felt alive, and so did she. The next morning, Emily found herself at an outdoor cafe near the Sydney Opera House. She had spent the morning wandering through the city's winding streets, exploring the markets, the art galleries, and the little hidden cafes tucked away in corners she had never expected. She was enjoying the solitude, the chance to be alone with her thoughts, away from the noise of the past year. The cafe was cozy, with small, round tables shaded by the tall palms that lined the outdoor patio. It had the kind of charm that only comes from being in a city with a rich history. There was something timeless about it. Emily ordered a cappuccino and settled into a chair, feeling the sun warm her face as she gazed out toward the opera house. As she took a sip of her coffee, she noticed a man sitting at the table next to hers, scribbling something into a notebook. He was absorbed in his writing, his brow furrowed slightly, as though deep in thought. Emily glanced at him again, her curiosity piqued. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. She turned her attention back to the skyline. the bright blue sky framed by the white sails of the opera house. It was a beautiful day, and yet, as she sat there, she felt a slight pang of loneliness. It was the kind of feeling that creeps up on you when you're in a foreign place, surrounded by people, yet somehow still alone. Suddenly, she heard a voice beside her. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help noticing your notebook. Are you a writer too?" Emily turned in surprise. The man from the table next to hers was now looking at her, his expression friendly, his eyes warm with curiosity. He had an easy smile, the kind that made you feel like you'd known him for much longer than you actually had. No, Emily stammered, taken off guard. "I'm not a writer, just a traveler. I keep a journal sometimes." He chuckled softly. "That's a good start. I'm James, by the way." He extended a hand and Emily shook it, surprised by the sincerity in his grip. "Emily," she replied. "Nice to meet you." "Are you here on vacation?" James asked, settling into his chair, his pen still in hand. His interest was genuine, but there was a certain ease to his demeanor that made the conversation feel comfortable. "Yes, just arrived yesterday," Emily said, her voice more relaxed now. "I've always wanted to see Sydney, and I thought the new year would be a good time to explore. I needed a change of scenery." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that. I'm here for the same reason. Getting away, trying to figure some things out." He paused, then added with a slight grin, "I'm a writer, so that usually means wandering around, people watching, and getting lost in the city. That's how the best stories happen." Emily laughed. "I guess that's one way to find inspiration." James's smile widened. "It's the best way, in my opinion. It's when you least expect it that life throws something interesting your way." They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing small bits about their lives. Emily found herself telling him about her year, the one that had been filled with ups and downs, love and loss. She didn't go into too much detail, but there was something about James's calm presence that made it easier to open up, even if just a little. "I came here to start fresh," Emily said, her voice quieting as she gazed at the opera house in the distance. "To leave behind the things that have been holding me back." James nodded, his eyes understanding. "I know what you mean. I've been trying to do the same thing, to move forward and leave behind what no longer serves me." He paused, looking out toward the harbor, his expression soft. "I think we all need that sometimes, a chance to step away and see things from a different perspective." Emily smiled softly, feeling a connection, though she couldn't quite explain it. It wasn't anything overwhelming or dramatic. It was simply a sense of shared understanding. They were both in Sydney for the same reason, both searching for something they couldn't quite name yet. "I think I'm hoping this year will be different," Emily added, her eyes meeting his. "That it'll be the beginning of something better." "I hope so too," James said, his voice warm. "For both of us." There was a moment of silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they had both acknowledged something unspoken, something that neither needed to define. In that moment, surrounded by the bustling city and the calm waters of the harbor, Emily felt as though she wasn't quite as alone as she had thought. "I'm going to be watching the fireworks tomorrow night," James said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "The ones over the opera house. I heard it's a pretty spectacular show." Emily's face lit up at the mention of fireworks. "I was thinking of going too. It sounds amazing." "Well, maybe we could watch them together," James suggested, his smile warm and genuine. "I mean, it would be nice to have some company." Emily hesitated for a moment, but only for a moment. There was something about the idea of watching the fireworks with someone who understood what she was feeling that felt comforting. "I'd like that," she said softly. And just like that, a simple conversation had sparked the beginning of something new. Neither of them knew where it would lead, But in that fleeting moment, it didn't seem to matter. The possibilities of the new year stretched out before them, full of promise and wonder. As the cafe began to fill with the chatter of other patrons and the sound of the city around them, Emily felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something beautiful. The night had finally arrived. Sydney's harbor was alive with the buzz of excitement, the air filled with a sense of anticipation. The city's skyline twinkled like a blanket of stars, and every street corner seemed to hum with the promise of new beginnings. Emily and James had arrived early, securing a spot by the water's edge near the Opera House, where the New Year's fireworks would soon light up the sky. The crowd around them was growing, a mix of locals and tourists, all eager to witness the grand spectacle. The energy was infectious, with people chatting, laughing, and taking photos of the glittering lights reflecting on the harbor. Emily could feel the excitement building within her, a thrilling sense of possibility that seemed to mirror the collective hope in the air. James was beside her, quiet for the moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. He looked more relaxed than usual, as though the weight of the world had lifted off his shoulders just by being here, in this place, at this time. Emily glanced at him, and for the first time, she noticed how the light from the nearby city lights caught his profile, making his features look soft and almost tender. "You okay?" she asked, her voice a gentle interruption to the peaceful moment. James turned to her, his lips curling into a small, reassuring smile. "I'm good. Just thinking about everything that's happened this year." He paused, his eyes briefly scanning the crowd before returning to her. "It's been a lot of changes, but being here, I feel like it's all leading to something better. Maybe it's just the New Year magic." Emily smiled softly, feeling a warmth in her chest at his words. She too felt that sense of something new beginning, like this moment held a promise of brighter things ahead. The fireworks were still an hour away, but already she could sense the excitement building, just as it had been inside her all day. "I know what you mean," she said, her voice quieter now. I think this year is going to be different for me, too. I'm ready for something new." She paused, then added with a small laugh, "Though I guess I'm still figuring out what that means." James chuckled, his eyes twinkling in the soft light. "I think we all are, in one way or another." The countdown was beginning. People around them started to settle in, shifting closer to the water, and the hum of conversation gradually turned into murmurs of anticipation. Emily felt the tension in the air rise as the clock ticked down to midnight. The sounds of fireworks in the distance were already starting, teasing the crowd with what was to come. She could almost feel the energy from the fireworks vibrating through the soles of her shoes. As the final seconds drew near, Emily turned to James. "Do you ever make a wish for the new year?" she asked, her voice almost lost in the rising excitement. James looked at her, his gaze steady and calm despite the frenzy around them. "I do," he said softly. "I think it's important to take a moment, to pause and think about what you really want, what you need, but I try to keep it simple, not too complicated." Emily smiled, feeling something unspoken between them, a shared understanding of the quiet hopes that often go unnoticed. She could feel the pull of the moment, the magic of the new year, and in that instant, she realized how much she wanted this year to be different. She wanted to let go of her fears, her hesitations, and embrace whatever was waiting for her, whether it was love, adventure, or something else entirely. The countdown was nearing its final moments. 10, 9, 8. James's hand brushed against hers, a simple, almost accidental touch, but it lingered there, just long enough for Emily to feel the warmth of it. She looked up at him, and for a brief moment, everything else disappeared. The crowd, the noise, the fireworks in the distance. It was just the two of them, standing there by the harbor, their hands barely touching, but somehow perfectly in sync. 7, 6, 5. In that instant, Emily's heart began to race, not with nervousness, but with a strange sense of peace. She wasn't sure what this moment meant yet, or where it would lead, but she knew that it was important, that this was the beginning of something new, something worth cherishing. 4, 3, 2. The crowd around them erupted into cheers as the clock struck midnight, and the first of the fireworks exploded in a brilliant burst of color. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the sky lit up with an array of shimmering lights, casting reflections on the water below. The sounds of the fireworks echoed across the harbor, and for a moment, everything felt perfect, like the world was wide open, full of possibilities. 1. Happy New Year, and with those words, 1,000 fireworks lit up the sky above them, painting the night in every color imaginable. Emily's heart swelled in her chest as she watched the sparks explode above her, her eyes wide with wonder. It was beautiful, breathtaking, like nothing she had ever seen before, and in the midst of it all, she felt something stir inside her, a quiet hope, a sense of renewal. James turned to her, his face illuminated by the glow of the fireworks. He looked at her with a soft smile, his eyes reflecting the light of the moment. Without thinking, without hesitation, their hands found each other again, this time with more certainty. Emily felt the warmth of his hand in hers, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. It wasn't just the fireworks that had lit up the sky. It was the connection between them, the unspoken bond that had grown over the past few days, and in this moment, it felt as though it was only just beginning. As the final burst of fireworks faded into the night, Emily closed her eyes for a moment, making a wish of her own. It wasn't a wish for something specific, but for the future to unfold as it should, full of love, laughter, and new beginnings. And maybe, just maybe, it would involve James. The night was young, and with it, so were they. The last firework had barely faded from the sky when Emily found herself turning toward James, her heart still pounding from the brilliance of the display. The colors of the fireworks had danced across the harbor like fleeting dreams, leaving trails of light behind them. The air was still buzzing with excitement, but in that moment, it felt as though time had slowed down. Everything was quieter, more intimate. James was standing next to her, his expression soft and thoughtful, as if the spectacle of the fireworks had stirred something deeper within him. They had both been caught in the magic of the moment, but now, with the final sparkles fading into the night, the world around them seemed to shift. "Wow," Emily breathed, her voice quiet as she looked at him. "I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before." James smiled, his eyes reflecting the last glimmers of the fireworks. "It was incredible, wasn't it? It's hard to believe something so beautiful can be gone in just a few seconds. Like all those moments, you know. So fleeting, but so powerful." Emily nodded, her gaze still on the darkened sky. "It's strange how something so brief can leave such an impact. You wait for it, anticipate it, and then in the blink of an eye, it's over. But you remember it. You carry it with you." James's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade into the background. There was a certain weight in the air between them, something that neither of them had said, but that they both felt, an understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that they had shared something beautiful together. "I think that's how life is," James said, his voice soft but steady. "We go through these moments, some big, some small, and we don't always know their meaning until they're behind us. But when you look back, you realize they shaped you, even the ones you didn't expect." Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of wonder and something else, something deeper, a connection that seemed to have grown stronger over the past few days. "I've been thinking a lot about that lately," she said, her voice low and thoughtful. "About the things that shape us, the choices we make, the things we let go of, and the things we hold on to, even when we don't always know why." James's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, his presence comforting and steady. "I know what you mean. I think we all have those things we can't quite shake. The past, regrets, fears. Sometimes they cling to us, even when we try to move forward. But I think, in the end, it's those very things that help us find our way." Emily let out a small sigh, a mixture of relief and contemplation in her eyes. "It's hard, though. Letting go of things that weigh you down. It's like there's always a part of me that's afraid to leave them behind, as if doing so means I'm forgetting something important." James nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "I get that. I think it's natural to hold on to what we've known, even if it hurts. But maybe letting go doesn't mean forgetting. Maybe it means accepting that it's time for something new to take its place, for something better." Emily turned to look at him fully, feeling a spark of understanding pass between them. There was something so simple yet profound in his words, a truth that she hadn't been able to grasp until now. Letting go wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making space for the future, a future that was still unwritten, full of possibility. "And what about love?" she asked, almost without thinking. The question had been on her mind since their conversation at the cafe. And now, with the fireworks fading and the quiet of the harbor surrounding them, it felt like the right time to ask. "Do you think love is something you can let go of too?" James looked at her, his expression softening, his eyes searching hers. For a moment he didn't speak, as if considering the weight of the question. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was a quiet vulnerability to it. "I think love is complicated," he said slowly. "We hold on to it, sometimes for too long, and it shapes us in ways we don't even realize. But I also think that love, true love, doesn't ever really leave you. Even if the person does, it stays with you in the way you see the world, in the way you understand yourself. And when it's time to move on, it doesn't mean that love is gone. It just means you're ready to love differently." Emily took in his words, feeling their weight settle in her chest. She had loved deeply once, and though that love had faded, she now understood that it didn't have to vanish entirely. It had shaped who she was, and it would always be a part of her, even if it was time to make room for something new. "I think I understand," she said softly, her voice full of quiet reflection. "It's not about forgetting the past. It's about making space for what's coming next, even if you don't know what that is yet." James's smile was gentle, his eyes warm as he nodded. "Exactly. It's the only way to move forward, to let life surprise you, and to let yourself be open to all the possibilities that come your way." The night was still, the sounds of the city now faint in the distance. Emily felt a sense of calm settle over her, as if the weight she had been carrying for so long had started to lift, even just a little. She realized, as she stood there beside James, that she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew that this moment, this connection, was something worth holding on to. The stars above them twinkled softly, and the quiet hum of the city filled the space around them. Emily and James stood together in the stillness, each lost in their own thoughts, yet somehow more connected than ever. The year was new, and with it came the promise of new beginnings, a chance to move forward, to love again, and to embrace whatever came next. In that moment, it felt as though they had both found something more important than fireworks or wishes. They had found a moment of true connection, one that would stay with them long after the night had ended. The last echo of the fireworks slowly faded into the night, leaving behind a quiet stillness that seemed to settle over the harbor like a soft blanket. The crowd had begun to disperse, moving slowly as the excitement of the evening softened into the quiet of early morning. The stars above twinkled brightly, almost as though they were mirroring the sense of possibility that hung in the air. Emily and James stood side by side, both silently watching the retreating glow of the fireworks reflected in the water. The moment felt like a bridge between what had been and what was yet to come, an unspoken understanding passing between them without the need for words. For a long time, neither of them moved. The sound of the city, distant but alive, filtered through the night air. The energy of the new year had quieted, but in its place, something deeper had begun to grow, a sense of shared anticipation, a feeling that something had begun to shift in both of them. Emily took a deep breath, her eyes still focused on the water. The last few days, the connection she'd felt with James had already changed something inside her. The doubts, the hesitation that had clouded her thoughts for so long seemed to have loosened their grip. Standing here with him, in this new year, she felt a shift, a movement towards something new, something that she wasn't yet sure how to define, but that felt undeniably right. James turned toward her, his presence grounding her, and for a moment, the noise of the world fell away. It was just the two of them now, standing together on the threshold of something unknown. The future, like the night sky above them, was full of stars, full of potential. "Happy New Year, Emily," James said, his voice soft but sincere. His smile was gentle, his eyes holding a warmth that made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't expected. He hadn't said much after the fireworks, but his presence, steady and calm, spoke volumes. "Happy New Year, James," Emily replied, her voice almost a whisper as she turned to face him. The simple words carried so much more than a greeting. They carried the weight of a new beginning, of everything they had shared so far, and everything that might come after. They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other, the silence between them comfortable, unhurried. Emily could feel the gentle hum of the world around them, but she was entirely focused on the man beside her. It was strange how, in such a short time, he had become someone important, someone who, in some way, had already become part of her new beginning. James took a step closer, and without thinking, Emily's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally, as though they had always belonged that way. His touch was warm and reassuring, and the simple act of holding hands felt like the first step into something beautiful and new. "I'm glad I met you," Emily said, her voice quiet, but filled with a depth she hadn't realized until she said the words aloud. James smiled, his eyes reflecting the quiet promise of the moment. "Me too. I think this year is going to be special for both of us." She nodded, a soft smile curving on her lips. "I feel that too, like we're starting something that could turn into something really good." James squeezed her hand gently, his gaze steady. "We don't have to know what it's going to be yet," he said. "Sometimes the best things are the ones that just unfold on their own." Emily's heart fluttered at his words. He was right. The future was unknown, but that didn't have to be scary. It could be exciting, and whatever it turned out to be, she realized, it was a journey she didn't have to take alone. The world around them was quiet now, the last remnants of the celebration fading into the distance. The stars above them, the city's lights, and the soft lapping of the water against the dock created a peaceful backdrop for this new beginning. Emily could feel the weight of the past easing, a lightness in her chest where there had once been a heaviness. James turned to her, his smile wide and full of promise. "Shall we go?" he asked, his voice light, as if the world was theirs to explore. Emily nodded, feeling a spark of excitement in her chest. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "Let's go." As they walked away from the harbor, their footsteps in sync. It felt as though the city was welcoming them both into the new year. A year full of unknowns, but also full of hope. They didn't need to know what would happen next. The future wasn't a destination, but a journey, and together, they were ready to begin it. The night stretched ahead of them, as full of possibility as the year that had just begun. With every step they took, the weight of old fears and uncertainties seemed to lift a little more, replaced by something lighter, something full of promise. And in that moment, as they walked side by side, hands clasped together, Emily felt that she was exactly where she needed to be. The new year had arrived, and with it, a new chapter, one filled with the kind of hope she had always dreamed of, but had only just begun to find. The journey ahead was wide open, and with James by her side, it was a journey that felt, for the first time in a long while, full of endless possibilities.